Yeah.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Inside the Markets. And we have an exciting new guest joining the show today who's doing some great things in the crypto world. Certainly for all of you folks who are watching the dollar, wondering what we're going to go to whenever this Ponzi scheme has concluded. And excited to have Joël Valenzuela of Dash joining us today from the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which is a place close to my heart, of the Port Fest Festival, which I know they've been involved with. So Joël, how is everything going today, and how are you, my friend?
Everything's doing pretty well. It's finally getting a little bit like winter, and I'm not just talking about crypto winter.
Yeah, I did see. It looked like the cryptos took a beating overnight again. Fascinating environment, which we can dig into a little bit as well, although perhaps just to start things off, for the folks who are hearing about Dash for the first time, or even the folks that are familiar, maybe if you could give a quick update and just let people know what Dash does, and especially if you could touch on, I know you've been living on Dash for a while, which I thought was pretty cool, and maybe if you could just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Dash is digital cash. It's a cryptocurrency meant for payments, meant to be used as actual money. I would call it the evolution of Bitcoin, where Bitcoin came out there and first debuted the idea of decentralized peer-to-peer electronic cash, and Dash kind of took that and zoomed home in on it. So a couple things that make Dash different are first off, instant transactions, where instead of having to wait 10 minutes or more for a block confirmation, you can actually be sure it's confirmed in about 1.3 seconds. Makes it great for point of sale transactions. And there's optional privacy, which was Dash's first thing that it did, which was basically obfuscates your transactions so you can't tell where a transaction came from in case you don't want someone snooping into your financial activity.
Right.
And the one thing that's most important, if you ask me, about Dash that's not always forward-facing is the governance system. Whereas with something like Bitcoin, 100% is decided by miners, and coders get nothing, and people running nodes and investors, I guess, get nothing.
Right.
Whereas Dash is a 45-45-10 split of 45% of all the new coins created and fees go to miners, 45 goes to something called master nodes, which are a specialized kind of node that they need to own 1,000 units of Dash in order to be able to run one. So you have to actually have skin in the game. And then there's a 10% left over to fund. Originally, it was meant to fund development, but it's multi-purpose, which is a treasury, which can fund just about anything. So obviously, paying for development is one big thing, but other things, what happens if you want to go to conferences? There's a lot of travel involved. Well, you can put a proposal and the master nodes vote for if that gets funded or not. And then there you go. Or what happens if you have a company that wants to integrate Dash but has a few extra ones, other coins that are higher on the priority list? Well, you can do some kind of you can fund the integration, help cover them some of the costs, and then they'll bump you to the top. And this mechanism not only allows Dash to be autonomous and not have to worry about outside influences, but also ends up being a really nice consensus mechanism where you don't have to argue about what your users or investors want. You can actually prove it.
Right. Yeah, which I found interesting. I remember I caught up with Alan Demarest from Dash back at the Libertopia Festival and thought that was a really creative way, really of marketing, in fact, where you're getting the users involved and allowing them to have a say in it, which, you know, also brings them on board. And it seems like that's played out pretty well, especially as we're looking to get more adoption.
Yes, exactly. One of the best, probably the biggest success story for Dash so far has been in Venezuela, where over 2,200 merchants now accept Dash down there, which is just growing by leaps and bounds. Just a few months ago, it was only 500.
Right.
And the reason for that, obviously, there's some pretty bad economic conditions and hyperinflation. It's a really great opportunity for cryptocurrency to really show its competitive advantage. But also there was a team on the ground that wanted to get Dash adopted widely, and they just put in a budget proposal. And even though they're not part of the Dash core team, the Dash core developer group, they could get funded and work as part of Dash just as easily. So, I mean, imagine if you have a large corporation or something and you're like, well, we want to start operations in Ghana right now. You have to do some kind of on the ground research. You have to find the right people. You want to hire. You got to figure out how to open an office. You have to even identify the problem. Whereas with Dash, anyone who wants to use Dash or wants to help it can just pop up and start working for Dash if they can convince the network that what they got going is a good idea. So it's like all the benefits of a strong and well-organized company with all the benefits of a completely decentralized system, which it is.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to hear that being used in Venezuela. Obviously, currency conditions there are not so good. Although what I think is interesting is that while there's a lot of folks that have criticism about the cryptos and still hang on to the idea of the dollar, I've wondered if at certain points as these currencies continue to collapse, it's almost that the people are going to be forced into using something that works. I'd be curious any more that you can share about how are people actually using it down there? And also, has that started spreading to places like Argentina, Zimbabwe, Turkey, and a lot of the other regions that with rising interest rates are experiencing the same kind of issues?
Yeah, so absolutely. First off, it's being used everywhere. I believe from my contacts on the ground there, it appears that the most commonly used business that accepts Dash is a food-related business, like a restaurant, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So people paying them those kinds of basic bills. I've seen quite a few things like mobile phone shops, tattoo parlors, you name it, like just about everything under the sun. And it has been spreading to quite a few spots. Like here in New Hampshire, there's plenty of places that take it, from the local vape and CBD shop to several restaurants and coffee shops to the prescription lens store to there's even the largest auto dealership in New Hampshire takes Dash directly. And so I might have to someone already bought a car for Dash a month or so ago. I might have to be the second one. So it's spreading all over. Colombia is the next hotspot because there's another team that's doing really great work there. And obviously being right next to Venezuela doesn't hurt. There have been a few extra hotspots. Obviously, places like Zimbabwe are another key target. The thing is, what people seem to, especially in the cryptoverse, seem to forget the hard work that these kinds of things take. That you don't just come in and say, "Hey, we got a great solution." That first off, you have to make sure everyone has the right device that can run something like this. Like, for example, a smartphone. How many of these countries with collapsing economies have universal smartphone access? That can be a hurdle. And then you have to find out liquidity, find out how do you acquire something, find out how do you change it for when you need to, find out if all that makes sense, get a lot of education and things like that going. So there's a lot of things. You have to basically have a sustained and very professional operation. That's one thing that I appreciate with the Venezuelan team is not only have they gotten their own Dash focused point of sale system working for merchants, but they also have something called Dash Text, which is an SMS based Dash wallet, which allows anyone with a flip phone to just text a number and send and receive Dash from there, and it's integrated into the point of sale system. So say you're a migrant worker in the U.S., you have your granny's at home in Venezuela, she's going through rough times, you can buy some Dash at like an ATM or whatever, and then just send it straight to her phone number, and she can go walk up to the restaurant or the grocery store and just type in a couple numbers and send, and then buy her stuff with Dash right there. And those are the kinds of problems that a lot of people don't think are there. They just say, well, everyone should use this stuff, and not, well, how?
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that because I've felt that often with a lot of the cryptos and Dash in particular, it's when you compare it to what we're using now, especially here in the US. A couple of weeks ago, I had some money wired. It ended up taking a couple of hours to get there. And I think the fee was around $40 versus what you can do with a crypto like Dash. So when people actually compare and take the time to look, it to me seems like a dominant business proposal, yet wondering if, as you've gone around and speaking to different businesses and places about implementing, it's really just getting over the hurdle more so of something that people are unfamiliar with. Yet once they are able to look into it and see, geez, this sure seems like an easier way to go than what we've been using. Is that kind of how those conversations play out?
Yeah, anyone who hears about this pretty much is very excited.
Mhm.
Now, after the excitement, then there's the reality of, well, what do I do next? And sometimes there isn't always an easy path that's been laid out, which is one thing I've been working hard at trying to blaze is that path forward. But for example, with a remittance payment, what you need to do is you need to find an easy way for, say, you have like a US to Zimbabwe remittance corridor.
Right.
Say you need to find your target market, Zimbabweans living in the US or people who know people there. If it's a migrant worker population, you need to find a way for them to use cash to easily do the transfer. And you need to find a way for people back home to then receive it and then use it as money or convert it into something that can be used as money. And so all those steps are just not there to begin with. But say you get an ATM, a dash dispensing machine,
Mhm.
and then you make sure it has like say a 1% fee or something low like that. Then you can just have flyers and do advertisement and whatever and get local populace to go and start buying. Educate, of course, it's always intimidating at first. Educate them on how to buy. Okay, you got it for 1%. Then you send it to your family back home. Then, of course, they have to know how to use it too. And then either they have a business they can spend it at over there, or you have to have an easy way to convert. And then those margins have to make sense. So it's actually cheap enough to warrant the change. And then bit by bit, you start saying, hey, well, can we get these people paid? What if someone is willing to pay for whatever service he's paying for in Dash, and then instead of having to buy it, the worker can just send their salary home? And then what if you start getting businesses to accept it there that then can pay their employees, et cetera, et cetera? And then the fewer hops, the more savings. I mean, you could theoretically pay someone who then pays who then pays their family back home, who then pays a business, who then pays their employee. And all those transactions together can still cost just about a penny or two, all combined. And that's the kind of thing that really changes the world. And you don't get there right away. You have to
Right.
do piece by piece by piece.
Which makes sense. Again, I'm stunned sometimes as I see the momentum behind the dollar system, which when you look at it rationally, the numbers speak for themselves. Yet there's that degree to which people are used to doing things the way they're used to doing them. Although along those lines, one of the questions I had for you is, what are the businesses doing? Obviously, the crypto pricing, at least in terms of price of dollars, has been volatile. So one of the concerns I hear with businesses is whether they're cashing back into the local currency, or perhaps some of the ones that are really on board are just keeping it in Dash. But how are a lot of the actual businesses that are accepting Dash, what are they doing after they have it?
Yeah, so it really depends, and it's sort of like asking the same question to businesses who take dollars. Do they take it in cash? Do they take it in cards? Do they move to their bank account? Everyone's different in what they do. But here in New Hampshire, as far as I know, 90+% of the businesses that take Dash just hold on to it, which
Okay.
I thought I mean, I'm honestly a little bit surprised at that, at just how high those rates are, including like buying a car or something like that. But there are a few that do convert. Obviously, in Venezuela, I think the conversion rate is probably low as well, because why would you want to do something that is like the worst crypto crash that never stops, just day after day?
Right.
So there are a few ways. There's a great service called Uphold, which is a brokerage service that's actually integrated directly into the main Dash Wallet app that allows you to buy and sell for 1.25% right in the app. So if you can set that merchant up with an Uphold account, I've crunched the numbers, right? You take a coffee shop that uses the Square point of sale system, those little Square card readers, the most common ones, or most competing things cost the same, about 2.5%. If you could set them up with Dash to just instantly convert, I know how to do this, it's about half as much, And then there is some bank transfer fee for the service to move. So basically, as long as you wait until you have at least a couple $100 in sales from Dash to move your bank account, you actually save money off of your credit card reader. This is using dollars, like turning it to dollars, staying in the inefficient system. So if once you create that safety bridge, you don't have to convert everything. You can just keep some, pay your employees, et cetera, et cetera. So
Right.
that's really the way that provides that security. That's like the super easy, super safe. You don't have to do anything too different. You just get on your phone and just put the send a bank button once it gets over a certain amount, and then you just don't have to worry about anything.
Right. Um, Now, in terms of the US and adoption and when us Americans can start comprehending some of these things, again, it's perhaps a little easier where the currency is already more overtly experiencing trouble in places like Venezuela. What do you think it's going to take before that happens in the US? I've been of the school of thought that maybe there will require more of the chaos that I see coming in the US markets before people are forced to switch. Obviously, with people are concerned about the pricing, yet stripping the pricing away from the actual adoption for a second, it just feels like at some point, once the adoption begins kicking in, that's when probably the price will follow as it's actually being used. So curious what you see happening in the US in terms of using cryptos, kind of like you've been doing in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I think it's more challenging maybe, but not at all impossible or not basically what we have right now is we have a whole bunch of things in the payments industry, a whole bunch of inefficiencies, and some areas specifically are much more inefficient. Cannabis is one big one because the federal government does not like cannabis, and so you have 15 to 30% cash handling fees. I mean, I've been to a dispensary in California. You go upstairs, one guy checks your ID, the other guy wands you down,
Right.
and then you have the ATM you have to go to withdraw. And then at some point, you have these giant armored trucks that have to come up and transport the cash and can get robbed or raided. I was talking to a supplier to a dispensary in Las Vegas who operates out of Atlanta. And when he has to receive payment for his materials, he sends an armored truck from Atlanta to Las Vegas to pick up a giant load of cash. There's a lot of inefficiency there. You don't have to make an argument for cryptocurrency. I've been to some cannabis conventions as well, and they you don't have to make the argument. They're on board.
Right.
As long as you can make it work, they're on board. Then you go for remittances, as we already discussed. Then you go for things like fitness supplements or things that have high chargebacks or online gambling or sports betting, things like that that have a lot of extra fees and extra risk associated. And once all those are taken, even offering a discount, you can get the average person to buy some in order to save money. Everyone wants to save money, right? And so you get that going, and then it's easier to say to the coffee shop, hey, look, there's a lot of people that want to use this because they're already using it to buy their cannabis next door. They're already using it to send to their grandma. They want their coffee too. And by the way, you'll save money. And then it starts to become pretty easy. But you got to target those big maximum use pillars, and then everything else works well. The thing is, I don't think there's any area where using the US dollar is more efficient. So
Yeah.
it's just about, is the margin thick enough to actually warrant a change?
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned the dispensaries. I'm here in Denver, Colorado, and I've heard that same issue you mentioned about really they end up with this amount of cash that regulations makes it hard for them to save safely. Is there some bridge that perhaps Dash could fill to directly, whether I don't know if it's possible with the regulations that they could accept Dash as payment, but perhaps a little further down the road, obviously Jeff Sessions just left Washington a couple days, a week ago. Is that something you see where that could really mitigate that problem where these dispensaries and other businesses where they end up with a lot of cash and are looking for a safe way to do something with that?
Yeah, I mean, that could obviously, the better the world becomes, the harder it is to sell solutions to a better world, right? And obviously, I think that once you start working on a cryptocurrency based system and you don't have to worry so much about the banking system at all, trying to be lured back into the banking system once it's more accessible is not that good of a sell. But
Right.
so I can't imagine a world where the cannabis industry ends up working in a highly there's also some concerns of people not wanting their financial privacy compromised and associated with certain products. And so I don't know if cannabis might always have a little bit of a stigma to it where people might want to pay in things like cash or like digital cash because they don't want it linked back to their identity. They don't want to show up on when their employer pulls some or potential employer pulls some data and just says, oh, it's one of those people. We don't, maybe we'll favor the other candidate. But there's always plenty of other things. Of course, the adult industry has had a lot of problems. I'm very unfamiliar with that industry, regrettably, so I don't know too much about the problems that they face. But I can just imagine anywhere where you need privacy or you want any kind of a lack of access or you have any kind of a system where you can lack the access to financial services. I mean, I was in the remittance slash immigrant corridor is always going to be there because if you think about it, 11 million or so Americans or people living in the United States, rather, let me be very specific about that, don't have legal papers.
Right.
That's the population of many countries. It's a giant chunk, and it's not going to be an issue that goes away anytime soon, either from that population either leaving or becoming completely legitimized legally. And I do remember there was a taco stand in San Diego I went to that said anything other than cash is a 5% premium. And I saw
Mhm.
they were using the Square card reader, which is only half that. And I'm sure the business owner's mind is so advanced to where they can calculate all different opportunity costs into something that makes sense. Even if they accept credit card payments, then they still have to withdraw the cash to then pay some of their employees or suppliers who might not have bank accounts. And so
Right.
that annoyance makes it less worth it for them to have card payments. So things like that, where there's a 5% premium for using the banking system, what if they can just download a little app, and if the business gets paid in something like Dash, they can just send it instantly for a fraction of a cent, and then they can send it instantly back home. They don't have to wait until they get time off work at Western Union to go to Western Union and do a transfer or something like that. So there's always going to be some place. The thing about cryptocurrencies, it's supposed to be decentralized and permissionless. And anywhere you have centralized permissioned systems, you're going to have inefficiencies that you can put a dollar and cent value on the cost of the centralization. And those are always going to be areas that will be prime targets for cryptocurrency. The entire economy, yes, but there's always going to be bigger, more important short-term goals too.
Yeah, it's amazing. One of those nice, rare situations where you have a dominant product at a much better price. Often, when I have to pay someone who's helping with things we're doing with the show or business, usually I have to go either to the bank or the ATM and get a check. And I keep thinking, wow, as the cryptos become more implemented, this could all be so simple. And although along those lines, and perhaps the last question for today, obviously, people who are new to cryptos, new to Dash in particular, wonder about the security of the systems. And perhaps if you could just touch on that. I've become pretty comfortable with it, although obviously there are those concerns out there. And anything you could add to that help people become a little more comfortable.
Yeah. So one of the best parts about cryptocurrency, more than any other kind of financial instrument out there, is radical transparency. Anyone with just a little bit of knowledge can go look at a block explorer, see all the coin supply in existence, see every single transaction, the median fee, the average fee, all kinds of different things, how much value is being transacted, et cetera, et cetera. They could check out everything. It's infinitely auditable. So you don't have to trust that the gold price isn't being manipulated, for example, for something that is, I mean, something like the US dollar is something that is inherently able to be manipulated at a moment's notice. You can audit the code. You could check if someone is trying to introduce like a supply increase. And then you have to have, of course, complete consensus for that to be implemented. So it's basically one of the safest and most rock solid kind of money is you can that exists. I mean, obviously, we as humans are always trying to improve on technology. We're always trying to improve, especially on technology that allows us to transmit value. And so, going from barter to then certain items to then coinage and then fractional reserve currency and things like that. Now we're on to the next level where we have something where everyone can just check out the whole network. Everyone can see it works. Everyone can see, anyone can participate in validating it. So you don't have to worry about one company going rogue or one entity doing something weird. So I think that this is going to be the newest, I think this is going to be the new standard for for security of wealth in the future once it becomes much more widely adopted.
Right. Also, I'd like to point out, I found it interesting as I was watching some of your other videos that you're a former, perhaps current precious metals advocate, which I've seen how, and I went through this myself, a lot of the gold and silver guys, we often get focused on gold and silver, yet again, it's interesting seeing once you take the time to learn and understand, they can really complement each other. I think there's room for both. And perhaps the last note before maybe you can tell people where they can find out more information, did want to pass along, had Demelza Hayes on the show on Monday, works for a fund called Incrementum in Liechtenstein, also teaches a blockchain class. And one of the last things I asked her was, what is a crypto that people should be aware of that's really on your radar? And she did mention Dash as the one that folks really should be aware of. So
smart person.
Yeah, and actually she was a really sharp woman doing a lot of interesting things. So perhaps following up on that, if you can just let folks know where they can find more information and anything to watch out for in the future.
Yeah, so as far as if you're interested in finding out how to acquire and use it, I would go to discover-.com. It's our big merchant directory that has all the businesses that accept it around the world, all the, 4,100 or so, and it has a few good, easy guides on what is Dash. If you want to get kind of caught up on what's happening in the Dash and cryptocurrency ecosystem, dashforcenews.com is a news website we also help run, and that kind of provides a lot of stuff, especially since sometimes there's a little bit of a media blackout around what aren't the top coins of the day that people pay attention to. And so that's a really great place to find a lot of extra information. So yeah, I would go to those two places, and between those, you can probably find out just about everything you need. The good spot about Discover Dash in particular is we actually have a live chat on there that allows anyone to just log in and ask a question, and we have someone there answering. So I mean, with Bitcoin, for example, you have to look for various sites, see if you know someone, etc. But Dash actually has a few consistent help desks there for people who want to come and learn more and have issues or questions or whatever.
And we will get those links below the interview so people can check those out. I'm also going to put the link to that video where you go around showing people how you've gone solely on Dash, which I think will really be great for people to see, because especially with the things that are happening in the world, I personally appreciate what you guys are doing and making solutions. We hear about all the problems and dollar this, dollar that, yet I think it's great that there are folks out there like you and your team that are really addressing that and letting people know that it can go on and in a great way. So Joël, I really appreciate you taking some time to join us today. It's a lot of great information you shared, and we'll look forward to staying in touch and following on the success of Dash.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.